Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today's a little bit of a different topic, but I did just want to sit down and talk about our process of buying a house. We just bought our very first house, and at the beginning I felt like the whole thing was just so daunting. I was also completely clueless to so many factors that went into buying a house, and honestly I felt pretty embarrassed to ask people because it just felt like these are things that I should know even though I never really learned. Honestly, I feel like there could be like a whole course, in fact there probably is, on the whole process of buying a home and being informed throughout that process. And what I thought I would do is, of course, never frame myself as an expert in this field, but just to share what that whole journey looked like for us and anything that came up that sort of was surprising to me or that was new to me, and just kind of break down the whole process step by step. Now, I know it's a lot of information, so I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible and only share the things that were really helpful for us. And the one thing that I do want to say is we bought a house in Ontario, Canada. So the process will probably, in fact, definitely be different depending on where you're buying a house. But I imagine that a lot of the steps would be similar or the same. And so it would just be a matter of kind of doing some research onto what that process looks like specifically in your area. Okay, so this seems kind of intuitive, but the first thing for us was just deciding where we wanted to live. There were so many things that went into that decision. Number one, especially considering the situation that we're in from a real estate perspective in Canada right now, is budget. And we were formerly living in Vancouver. We found out that we were pregnant and we wanted to move into a bigger space and potentially buy our first home. However, very quickly Vancouver was eliminated from our possibility list because we simply couldn't afford anything that would be a good space to accommodate our family. We also took into consideration, in our case, family and proximity to family, because we will be bringing a child into the world, and having some family close by will really be helpful for us. And then there are other considerations, of course, that go into deciding where it is that you want to live, whether that's work considerations or environmental considerations. And something that me and Jamie kind of discussed throughout this whole process was how we weigh each of those factors. And it just so happened that budget was a big factor, and then of course family was a big factor for us. So unfortunately we did lose out on some of the beautiful aspects of Vancouver, which we don't really have in the area that we're living in Ontario, but it's very worth it to have that proximity to family. And we just kind of had to go through the process of coming to that realization and weighing out the different options that we had. The next thing that we did and we had a discussion about was just basically how much we were able to put down for a down payment, how much the two of us had in savings, as well as how much we wanted to set aside for ourselves and for the baby, and also for the closing costs. That's one thing that I did not realize going into it, was it's not just the down payment that you have to have cash available for, it's also the lawyer fees, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and the land transfer tax, and just different kind of fees that we didn't anticipate before having purchased the home, but that as we went along it was good that we had a little bit tucked away for that as well. So once we had a clearer idea of what the two of us were going to be able to contribute for a down payment, meaning how much actual money was going to be coming out of each of our accounts, we were able to then start doing some research on mortgage lenders and start to look into what the different rates were. Now, a lot of the lenders that we researched and that we even kind of inquired with had very, very similar rates, so it didn't make a huge difference. But I also feel like it's important to get a sense of the type of service that they provide you, the type of communication that they provide you with, and those are things that are important, because as we found out later on, good communication when you're like down to the wire and you need things to be moving fast are like so essential, and having people that are actually going to be caring about you and having sort of that personal relationship was actually very important as time went on. We were actually encouraged to shop around to a few different lenders, so just to see, you know, what they would pre-approve us for or pre-qualify us for. So basically we went through the process with, I would say, about 3 different lenders of submitting our documentation and then seeing kind of what they suggested. And I will say, interestingly enough, we applied to 3 and they all gave us very different ranges, which I found kind of interesting. So how it worked for us was we explored a few different options. We ended up deciding that we wanted to go with a smaller credit union that's local, very close to us. We can go in if we need to. I have a history of working with them. It just felt a little bit more personal. So we ended up deciding to go with that lender. Once we had a rough idea of the rates that we'd be looking at, so the interest rates, we were looking at anywhere from like 5.5 to 6 as an interest rate on our mortgage. And what we wanted to do from there was just to understand sort of our own budget outside of what we were pre-approved for. At this point, we hadn't actually been pre-approved by the local credit union, but we had started to have conversations with them and sort of casually started to submit some documents. So at this point, I thought it was really important to know, like, what do we feel comfortable with? Because I knew that they would probably approve us for the top range that we could afford, but that didn't necessarily mean that that's what we wanted to go for. So what we did was we used like an online mortgage calculator. We put in how much we were willing to put down, and then we just put in a few different numbers for the purchase price, and we just played around with that a bit, again putting in that 5.5 interest rate because we saw that that's what this lender would offer us, and we just started to get an idea of what our monthly mortgage payments would look like. Now, we were renting prior to buying a new place, and we didn't really want to go much higher than what we were renting for, especially since there are more costs associated with ownership. So we kind of played around with the mortgage calculator, and I'll show you an example of how that could look. And then we found sort of a range that we wouldn't feel super stretched from a monthly payment perspective, but that we both felt comfortable and like we could afford. Okay, so let's open up this mortgage calculator. This is the one that we used. So you put in your purchase price, and again, we just experimented with this to get an idea of what something would look like. So let's say we put in $650,000 for a purchase price, and let's say for the down payment we put in $100,000, just to see what that would look like. Amortization period, so how long that will take to pay off, I just always left it at 25 years. And then for the mortgage interest rate, 5.5, because that's what we knew our lender would offer us. Payment frequency, monthly. You can also do bi-weekly, weekly, there's a few different options there, and then calculate. So this one comes out to about $3,400 a month. So basically we could determine if that was doable for us. If not, try to lower the purchase price because our down payment isn't going to change unless we decide to put in a little bit more there. That will give us a better understanding of what we're actually willing to pay on a monthly basis. We really didn't want to be stretched, so what we ended up getting pre-approved for, we went significantly under that, and that just personally makes me feel a lot more comfortable to not feel so stretched by a mortgage payment. And like I said, I thought that this was important to do before actually submitting everything and getting that pre-approval, because of the fact that it can be very tempting when you're told, hey, this is what you can afford, to go for that top range, but to actually have done the calculation yourself beforehand and know, like, I think I'd feel more comfortable at this range if we can find that, then that just made me feel a lot more comfortable going into it. So the next thing that we did was actually go through to get the pre-approval with our bank. Now, one thing that I wasn't aware of when it came to getting a mortgage was that the pre-approval is just like a rough idea of what you could likely afford based on the documentation you provide, but it's not necessarily like 100% what you'll receive. That comes a little bit later once you actually have put an offer in and you send off the documentation for the offer. At least this is how it worked for us. And then that allows them to actually approve you for a specific amount, which is what you actually need for the house. So it's not like you can get pre-approved for say $350,000 and then you end up only needing $200,000 and then you can just keep the rest of it. I thought that maybe that was something that could happen, but they're only actually going to approve you for the difference between what they're taking out of your account as the down payment and the purchase price of the home. Okay, so how the actual process worked for us, and again, we tried out a few different lenders. Some of them had online portals where you could upload all of your documentation. In the case of the lender that we ended up going with, everything was sent via email, and these are just some documents that we had to send just to give you a rough idea. Scans of our photo IDs, so driver's licenses, passports, most recent pay stubs in Jamie's case because he's employed, I'm self-employed, so that didn't apply to me. Any work contracts or employment agreements, tax documents from 2 years, so T4s and notice of assessment. I don't know if that's what they're called in the US or in other countries, but that's what they're called in Canada. 3 months of account statements for the account or accounts the down payment would be coming out of, and then any other account statements from any other bank accounts that we had. So for being self-employed, the process was slightly different because I don't have a letter of employment and I don't have pay stubs. And I will say that it seemed like I had to submit a lot more proof and a lot more documentation to kind of prove that I was able to afford what they were going to approve us for. So things that I had to provide were proof that I didn't owe any outstanding income tax to the CRA, income statements for the year, and I also had to like actually itemize my client names and dates and all that stuff. Luckily I have that in QuickBooks, so it wasn't too difficult. And then also any losses my business incurred, etc. So one thing that really helped us was to actually have all of these documents in a shared Google Drive, and then if there was anything else that needed to be sent, uploading it into that one spot. So it was all just easy, and also if you know you're going to go through this process to kind of start to collect those documents in advance wouldn't be a bad idea. One thing that made such a difference in this whole process for us was having a good realtor. In a lot of situations that we were in, we had to act really fast and, you know, things were really competitive. And so we needed someone that was really responsive, really able to quickly schedule viewings. And that just made such a difference for us. And it made us feel very confident about getting things. And I can just see how not having that support would have caused a lot of delay. And in the case of the house that we ended up getting, we may not have got it because we literally put an offer in the first day that it was on the market. They received so much activity for that house. So had we not been able to like get in there quickly and have a realtor that was available, then that probably wouldn't have worked out for us. Our realtor also wasn't afraid to like highlight red flags, because the reality is if they make the sale, they're going to get the commission. But I would never want someone who was like pushing us into anything or having this sense of urgency, because for us when we're buying a house it's like such a big deal, and I don't want to ever feel pushed into something that we're going to later regret. So it was really nice to actually have someone who would highlight things that we may not have been aware of, like what basements. So something that we would ask her when we went to viewings was just like, do you see anything that is a red flag? Is there anything you want to let us know about? And she would never shy away from like sharing her honest opinion about the places and sort of let us away from situations that probably would have been a bigger issue down the line, but we just were not aware of with it being our first time. Our realtor specifically said that she loved working with first-time buyers, and that was super helpful because she literally took the time to like explain everything. We would have really long calls with her and she would walk us through everything. I didn't feel really embarrassed to ask her any questions throughout, and honestly that just made such a difference. One question I had when it came to realtors was like, do we pay her? Like, how does this work? Because, you know, you reach out to the realtor and then they start taking you to viewings, and all this time I'm like, she's providing us with this service, but are we paying her? Like, how does that work? But we found out that the commission comes from the sale of a house, so they get a percentage of that. I believe in our case it was around 2%. So it's not like we are paying her on top of what we're paying for the house. And then one other random thing I wasn't aware of was if there's an open house for a property that you really like, you can ask your realtor to take you in advance, and we did that a few times. And I thought we kind of had to like wait for the open house to go. That was not true. So then when we actually found the place that we wanted to put an offer in on, here are a few things that I wasn't aware of until actually going through the process. So first of all, conditions that we were able to add to our offer if we wanted to. The home inspection, so basically having a home inspector come through, and I believe that if anything like glaring comes up, that may be an opportunity to renegotiate. This actually happened on a house that we viewed. We didn't end up going for it, but basically we were told that the people who ended up buying it did a house inspection inspection, something came up that was going to be a significant cost to them. What they ended up doing was making a significantly lower offer, and they did get it in the end, but it just means that, you know, when these red flags come up, it's an opportunity to perhaps negotiate the price. What I did find with the home inspection was on the more competitive houses, they would not accept a home inspection, so we kind of came to terms with not really being able to do it. But I did bring my dad, who has sort of a background in homes. He's like done a lot of renovations to ours and other homes. I brought him along to all of our viewings just to be able to have that reassurance if there were any like major things, to be able to have him there to like take a look at things, and then also trusting that our realtor would share any red flags that she was aware of. We did end up going with a place that we didn't get a home inspection for, so of course there could be things that come up, but we ended up feeling comfortable with that. So the next condition that we actually ended up putting on our final offer, and we probably would have put on any offer that we made, was financing. And this just protected us from the situation where, let's say we're pre-approved for a certain amount, but then when we actually make the offer and we send our mortgage lender the house, they're not actually willing to provide us with a mortgage for that property for whatever reason, or they appraise it to be less than what we've offered and they'll only offer us a mortgage up to that point, and then we have to pay the rest. There's still a series of steps that need to happen after actually being pre-approved in order to actually get the money that you need, and we just always wanted to have that financing condition in for peace of mind and to not basically screw ourselves over financially if the worst case scenario were to play out. And then something that surprised me is that you can actually add conditions for inclusions of specific appliances or furniture. So in the offer that we made, we really wanted this like long harvest table that they had in the space. They still did come back and say, no, we're not leaving that, but they did include a lot of other things that we're going to get to have that they're going to leave back. Okay, so I'm just going to walk you through the scenario that happened with our sale. So basically we wanted a home inspection and a financing condition, and we wanted 2 weeks to be able to complete those conditions. What ended up happening was, because the seller was aware that it was a really competitive property, they asked us to remove both the conditions. We really didn't feel comfortable doing that, like I said, with the financing one. So what we did was we removed the home inspection and we moved the date up a little bit to have the financing secured, and they ended up accepting that offer. So basically we had just over a week to make sure that we got fully approved on our mortgage. And like I said, this is why it was so important to have a really good communication with the lender and to have someone that we trusted and that we felt comfortable with and that was really responsive. It was very stressful because it was kind of like we had submitted all the documents. It was just a matter of like waiting, but it ended up all working out in the end. And once we got the green light from our lender, which luckily happened on time, we then signed off on the final paperwork, and that was kind of the sale of the house. While this was all happening, we also needed to make sure that we were reaching out to a real estate lawyer, and to be honest, I literally had no idea why. Like, I didn't know why they needed to be engaged, but we got a recommendation from our realtor and we just went with the first person that she recommended, and she was great. But I did look it up on remax.ca why you need a lawyer and what they do, and it says the lawyer is necessary to register a property and purchase a home to ensure that it is legal. They also deal with, I believe, like the land transfer tax and stuff like that. In the case of me and Jamie, because we're first time home buyers, we were able to get a credit on that. Specifically in Ontario, or maybe it's Canada-wide. The other thing that we had to do was to reach out to our insurance provider. Now, we already had an insurance provider in the area for our car insurance, so we just ended up going with them for our house insurance as well. This part of the process was actually super easy. We actually just needed to email over some key info about the property, some of the things we didn't know because they weren't on the listing, so we just asked our realtor and then she asked the seller's realtor, and then we were able to get everything together. But what we had to provide was the closing date, the address, the MLS listing, if we had any insurance history, which we didn't, but if we did, we would have needed a letter of experience. We needed to send the square footage, whether or not the basement was finished, the electrical, was it breakers or fuses, plumbing, copper and ABS, heat, what was the heat source, and the age of the roof. Again, some of those pieces of information we didn't have, so we needed to follow up with our realtor. Okay, here's some last tips that I wanted to share and things to know. The first is don't be afraid to look at a bunch of properties. Like I said, I really didn't want to feel pressured into making a decision. We luckily had a bit of time, and there were ones that we were like, maybe, but you don't really want to feel that way about a big purchase like a house. So not feeling rushed into anything, not feeling like we were like wasting the realtor's time, which is why it's so helpful to have someone who's not pushy and who isn't like instilling this sense of urgency. Another thing was to set up alerts on real estate websites. So in our case, realtor.ca, Zillow, and House Sigma, so that we didn't miss any listings. Like I said, a lot of the houses that we ended up looking at were competitive and required us to like act fast. So trying to arrange viewings as quickly as we can and not waiting so that we could have a better shot if we did want to make an offer. Also, another thing is like not being afraid to look at places that had conditional offers. You can see on House Sigma if something is conditionally sold, and we actually asked our realtor if it was okay to go ahead and see some of them just to, you know, get a sense if the deal did fall through, then we could perhaps make an offer. And two of the places that we viewed that had conditional offers, those offers ended up falling through. So that actually concludes all of my tips and insights. Like I said, this definitely isn't meant to be like expert advice by any means, but just thought I would share a few things that really helped us throughout the process. Best of luck on your house hunting journey. I'm excited to hear how it goes for you. If you have anything to add or anything that you found helpful, also feel free to leave it in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.